Audi TT, you had my curiosity. Now you have my attention. This is a 2013 Audi TT RS Plus. I don't know about all of you, but I really miss cars like this. Though the TT in of itself was never something that I lusted after, this TT RS really represents to me what made cars quite so special, even very recently. And this perfectly demonstrates just how much things have changed in what is a fairly short space of time. The Mark II TT itself came out in 2006, being discontinued in 2014. The first generation of TT never really had an officially quick variant. The top of the line model for much of its run was the 3.2 litre VR6 car, but they never got an S or RS designation. The closest they really ever got was the Quattro Sport, with a hotted up version of the 1.8 litre Turbo 4, though the 6-cylinder carried over into this second generation car, which fundamentally is based on the same platform that underpins a Mark V Golf. It again was not the top of the tree. In fact, there were two other engines above it. 2008 saw the introduction of the TTS, the first production sporty TT. That was powered by a 270 horsepower variant of Audi's 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo. And then in 2009 we got this, the TT RS. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. One more cylinder, and doesn't this sound so much more exotic? This comes from that glorious era where manufacturers made the higher end cars faster and more special by giving us a different engine, rather than simply turning up the wick on the same 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo that they put in just about everything else. And it really works. After all, you talk to anybody about an Audi and you say, oh, I've got the hot one. They go, oh, is that the 5-cylinder? Because that is exotic, that is cool. In so many ways, actually, it's a little bit more interesting than a 6-cylinder, because if you're a BMW guy, that's actually pretty ordinary. A 5 is a rare, unusual, and rather wonderful thing. Powering the first TT RS was a then all-new 2.5 litre turbo direct injection lump, making 335 horsepower, 332 pound-foot of torque, that's 450 newton meters, and the car also received all the usual refinements: a slightly lower and beefier suspension, along with the option of Audi's Mag Ride, which this does not have. You've also got better brakes, that fixed rear spoiler, different styling to make the car look just that little bit more aggressive, and to my eyes, still quite modern. And I don't think anyone that owns a TT is going to be offended by you saying it looks a bit like an R8. Naturally, Audi's trademark Quattro system was also fitted as standard, here a Haldex-derived item with, again, uprated components to cope with the additional torque. And that, allegedly, is why, when new, this car came exclusively with a 6-speed manual gearbox. Can you imagine that now? Audi releasing a new high-performance variant of a car and saying, by the way, they're only manual. Not long after, this car did get an automatic gearbox option, the 7-speed version of VW's DSG, this being an Audi branded S-Tronic. That apparently was better suited to cope with the extra demand. Today's star car, brought to me by its lovely owner Jordan, differs from the TTS that I drove in a couple of key ways. First off, it is an RS. Secondly, that one had standard powertrain but some suspension modifications. This is the opposite. So the suspension, the styling, all the stuff you see, barring this head unit here, is standard. However, it has had a remap. Very popular, and really one of the reasons people like to buy these cars. Turning circle, actually surprisingly good. This car, being a Plus, already had more power than the original to begin with, so 355 horsepower versus 335. Torque also was up by a modest amount, about 15 pound-foot. But this exact car now makes allegedly some 440 horsepower, which means it should be quite lively. Jordan has had an eclectic selection of cars in his time, from things like an Audi S3 to classics like the Porsche 944 Turbo and even a brand new A35, which is what this replaced. He was on the hunt for something that just felt a little bit more special and exciting. He was considering the fairly obvious, a Porsche Cayman, and didn't consider the TT at all, but he decided to give it a go because he has dogs. And though the rear seats aren't really that good to him, or indeed anybody, the fact that they can fold down, the parcel shelf be removed, means that this car is the perfect pupper transport for a petrol head. Once he'd had a go of the TT RS, he said that he was absolutely smitten. It was enthusiast owned, very well cared for, and today, despite near 40,000 miles on the clock, looks absolutely immaculate. It is in what I think for the TT is one of its better colours. This glorious red has the carbon pack, which doesn't seem to get you all that much. Wing mirrors and a little bit of cover on the engine, that's it I think, but most importantly it has these seats. These are the fabled Recaro wingbacks, and they're brilliant. If I were to buy a car like this, they'd be the only seats that I'd want. Paired with this beautiful and heavily sculpted steering wheel, which I rather love, these very simple yet elegant dials, you do get more than a touch of baby R8 vibes in here. It's rather wonderful. Sure, there's a little bit too much scratchy plastic for my liking, but like the TTS, your dash is covered in a bit of leather with some contrast stitching. I love the way that the handbrake looks, that's pretty cool. The gear lever is nice in the hand. There's also some very decorative stitching here and on the seats too, and a bit of leather in the cabin as well. Overall, I would say it does a fairly good job of trying to convey that sense of premium that Audi always say they're about. But I know what you're thinking, James, it's a fast Audi. Surely it's going to be just like the rest of them. So pretty brisk in a straight line with a decent soundtrack. Standard exhaust, by the way, but with the valves permanently open. However, it won't have any steering feel, and when you try and chuck it into a bend, it'll simply understeer you into the nearest hedge. Is that the case? Let's find out. In terms of Audi cliches, I'd say it's about 50-50. It's certainly quick, can grip really well even in these conditions which are far from ideal. It looks cold and miserable out there, because it is, but it isn't all that wet, so grip today is actually better than you might imagine. The engine is certainly a highlight, pulls pretty strong from fairly low down. Let me see if I can find out where the turbo comes alive. Yeah, 2.5, and it's strong. There's always a little bit of lag, but with a car like this, you do kind of expect it. It is part of the charm. The red line here is about 7,000, and the engine will happily go there, but like most turbo units, it seems to do its best work in the mid-range. Get this car between 3 and 5.5, and it delivers devastating performance. Doesn't seem to have much of an issue with getting around a bend either. I'm tramping on now, and yep. Car's fine, no protestations whatsoever. I would say, if anything, it feels a touch less front-led than the TTS. Perhaps that's a placebo, perhaps a function of the road, the tyres, the conditions today, I don't know. But that is how it feels to me. You can still tell that the engine is up front, but it no longer feels like that's where all the drive is. The gearbox is good, if not great. The throw, short enough, very pleasant, but just has an air of vagueness about it. Love that. Geared nicely too. Second will get you to about 60 miles an hour, meaning you can have a bit of first, second and third without doing silly speeds. Weaknesses. Steering. Let's start with that, shall we? Because for a petrol head, I think that's going to be the biggest one. There is an amount of texture and feel coming through it, but it just doesn't excite. You tip into a corner like this and it should be a wonderful experience. In just about any Porsche it would be, but here, no. The car is quite inert. My other qualm is with the suspension. Now, a car at this price point, you'd realistically be comparing it with a 987 generation Cayman or Boxster, depending on whether you're looking at the coupe or convertible. Those are very well damped cars. They also steer brilliantly and have a fabulous 6-cylinder soundtrack, but not the firepower of this. not even close. Though the sportier versions of those can be a little bit on the firm side, once you start to press on, it all makes sense. They flow with the road, they work well. Here it always feels like you've got a more jagged ride. There's a harder edge to everything, even fairly small imperfections, like that pothole just shook you a bit more than they really needed to. This may be partly down to the fact this car does not have mag ride, but bear in mind, many a Boxster or Cayman also wouldn't have had Porsche's equivalent. It is the wheels, I think, that also need to take some responsibility. Gargantuan 19-inch things. On this, it's just unnecessary. They look a size too big, and they look heavy. You know what I mean? They just do. And it does feel like those partially are responsible for the thing thumping into the ground a little bit more than it should. Some more good news. The fuel economy is fantastic. On the way down here, a sort of 2-hour motorway jaunt, Jordan achieved over 35 to the gallon, which for a car with this performance is fantastic. Even having now played around for a little bit doing drive-bys and the review and things, the car is still averaging 30.8. That's brilliant, and weirdly, better than the TTS was getting. Perhaps that car was being driven a little harder than we realised, but there's also a chance that the map here actually has improved things. That's not unheard of. I don't know who did the map, by the way. It was done before the car was purchased. MRC seemed to be one of the most popular companies, and 400 to 450 horsepower seems to be quite achievable from this engine. The brakes also look and feel up to the task of stopping the car, just as well as the TT RS Plus also got an increased speed limiter. The original car, 155. This, 174, and it will hit it. I'm almost upset that this piece of road appears to have been patched up. It was getting quite bad, which from a test perspective actually made it quite good. Luckily, much of its character still remains. Right, how does this do? That was one of my more demanding sections of road, and though the car was not comfortable, it also didn't bottom out, which a lot of things can, particularly at that speed. If anything is bugging me about the TT, and one thing that would put me off buying one, is how ubiquitous they are. While I've been filming this review, I've seen 5. 5. One just went past. They're everywhere. I guess in some ways that means it's a good thing, because it's a car that people clearly like. It has an air of practicality, though I would say the back seats, pretty useless for any but the smallest of children. The boot is decent though, and in this generation there was an engine to suit just about everybody, including a diesel. But if you were the person that bought a diesel TT when it was new, have a word with yourself, please. What were you thinking? Actually, if you did, please tell me what you were thinking. I would love to know, genuinely. Overall, I must say, I find myself somewhat charmed by this car. I love the soundtrack, it certainly goes well enough. The manual gearbox really, for me, adds an extra level of engagement and enjoyment, and I suppose you can, in some small way, pretend that this is a modern iteration of the old Audi Quattro, particularly with that soundtrack behind you and the all-wheel drive cross-country ability that this thing has. It's not maybe as silly a comparison as it first sounds. What then are you going to pay to get yourself into one of these? Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because the TTS, you can pick an example up from £8,000 to £10,000, but this, an RS Plus, well, there was only 4 for sale today on Auto Trader, and they were all about £25,000, so quite a bit more money. The regular RS, of course, is available for less, but still an appreciable amount more over the S. Is it worth it? That is the million-dollar question. I suppose the real problem is that if you are buying this to be different, to get something other than a Porsche, you are going to come up against the issue I've already noticed, that TTs are everywhere. But in the TT's favour, I think the balk factor of this versus a 987 is significantly lower. There are far fewer big issues surrounding these. It will also appeal to the sort of person that loves to tinker and play with their car. Getting more power out of a 987 is a pretty big deal. This, it's the work of a morning. And it certainly moves, I can tell you. With the Audi TT as we know it now done, If there is a replacement, it will be all electric. I think values of these are almost certain to at least stay where they are, if not rise in the coming years. For some, I suspect this may be a car simply a little bit too ordinary, but for others, it may well just strike the perfect blend of silly and sensible. I quite like it. It still looks great too. In fact, I really struggle to think of any reason to buy a Mark III over the Mark II. And perhaps that's all I really need to say about it. A huge thank you to Jordan for bringing his car out, and as ever to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.